When a country gets quiet, smart money gets loud. While Auckland is fumbling and Wellington is wheezing, there are regions in New Zealand quietly surging, turning over, cash flowing, and compounding. Today we shine a spotlight where no one else is looking. With BNZ's Mike Jones, we reveal the real housing hotspots of 2025.
Financial freedom faster. Financial freedom faster.
If you like watching other people make money, keep scrolling. But if you're the kind of person who wants the edge, the insights before the headlines, hit subscribe. Because in 2025, more NZ investors get their housing intel from this show than anywhere else on YouTube. The smart ones already know, and now you do too. Mike, where in New Zealand is the market quietly booming right now while cities sleepwalk?
Yeah, I think it's still, and we've talked about this before, I think it's still basically not just housing, but the economy generally. The further south you go, the stronger the market is. And so actually Southland has been the strongest performing housing market for most of this year. I was down there recently, down in Invercargill, doing a presentation. I sort of asked them, why is that? What's going on? And they just said, oh, it's the best place in the country to live. Like, it's obvious. So there you go.
Tell everyone. Don't spoil it.
Well, people, and look, that's probably a good point. Brings me to the second point. Look, that is where people are moving, not specifically necessarily to Invercargill, but if you look at where people in New Zealand, internal migration, are moving, they are moving south. They're going from out of Auckland, out of Wellington, out of some other parts of the north, and they're generally going south, particularly to Canterbury, Christchurch, but also Otago. And I don't think you can underplay that kind of power of people moving in terms of boosting some of those economies and some of those housing markets. If you look at turnover or house sales up and down the country, Canterbury outpacing just about everyone, and same for pricing as well. Clearly there's a sort of affordability pickup as well, which is driving some of that. But those people flows where you've got obviously cheaper, until recently, noticeably cheaper house prices in some of those southern regions compared to north.
Yeah, I mean, Southland, Canterbury, Gisborne, the BNZ data shows double-digit growth, double-digit turnover. But what's driving these pockets of strength? Is it industry? You must be able to pin it to a few specific businesses or industries that is pulling people in.
I think you can probably say, look, there's more of an exposure in some of those regions, Canterbury, Otago, Southland, to primary. And in primary, dairy, meat, horticulture are clearly the bits of the economy that are propping it up the most, the strongest parts at the moment. So that's probably something that's feeding into the mix. The other one, of course, we just talked about, population, strong internal migration into those parts of the country as well. And then the third, you'd probably say, well, there's still a bit of an affordability angle as well, where maybe younger people are moving to those parts to be able to buy or get a step onto the property ladder that they might not have otherwise been able to do in Auckland or similarly more richly priced.
If we zoom in on that, is this people escaping the cities and it's a cost of rent based decision, and that's helping support these very high yields compared to what we had a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it is. I think it's a flee the cities vibe, and that's a term we've used before when you look at those internal migration numbers, because it's not just it's not just the regions. It's not just people leaving, say, Auckland and Wellington regions and moving south. It's if you did go deeper into the regions, it's people leaving Auckland City, Wellington City, even Christchurch City, and fanning out to those kind of fringe regions like Selwyn, say, in Canterbury, or some of the fringe regions in Auckland, which I think is probably makes a lot of sense, because it's where you've been able to get a bit more land for a lower price, and affordability metrics are better. I think what we saw in COVID and through lockdowns was that trend, which was already there, spiked up. So more people left cities and moved to regions. A lot of Aucklanders went north to Northland, and Cantabrians moved out of Christchurch into the fringes, etc. that the pace at which people are doing that has reduced, but the directional flows are still there, which I think are quite interesting. So I always look forward to those numbers that come out once a year. It's kind of a geeky statement, but I am an economist, that tell you, will give you an update on those flows and where they're going, because I think that's quite an important fundamental driver for those regional economics and also regional housing markets.
What's happening with the townhouse oversupply in Auckland and Wellington, and when's the pain gonna end there?
Well, we pulled out townhouses in that last note, or a couple of notes ago, that we did on housing supply, because, as I said, we all know there's lots of supply about, but kind of where is it in the regions, and can we say anything about where it is in different market segments as well? And so, yeah, as you say, it's most obvious in Auckland and Wellington. Even if you obviously you adjust for population and things like that, there is most of, would you call it an imbalance? I still think actually the market's fairly well balanced, but probably if there is an imbalance, it would be most obvious in Auckland and Wellington. And then townhouses, Auckland and Christchurch, in particular. I mean, we've been watching, I'm sure you have as well, those consent numbers for townhouses in those parts of the country obviously boomed a couple of years ago. They're coming back now, but I think what we're seeing is some of that extra construction and supply in the market now, and a lot of it is finding its way, as you said, into the rental market, because maybe it hasn't been able to be sold, or certainly not at the price that people would like. So it's in the rental market, especially in Christchurch, putting extra supply, obviously putting some downward pressure on rents.
Well, how does the regional employment strength correlate to the housing resilience right now? And I'm looking at some of your figures of Hawke's Bay, Gisborne, Taranaki. Is there actually a lot of resilience economically in those areas, and that's pulling people in that can't get jobs in the main centres?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the employment picture. I mean, I think this, the supply picture, we talked about Auckland and Wellington being relatively looser. If you look at the tighter end, it is, Hawke's Bay, Bay of Plenty, and a couple of other regions. I think, Waikato and Gisborne crop up as well, that are relatively tighter than most. So maybe that's telling you that there's a bit more demand for a given amount of supply in those sorts of areas. And that's maybe indicative of less downward pressure on prices compared to some of those other regions. I think, if you think about employment, I think it's a pretty nationwide picture at the moment. The employment market, the labour market is pretty weak everywhere.
Is infrastructure spend following the population growth in these booming regions, or are we setting up for future bottlenecks?
Yeah, great question. Hard to know. I think, anytime there's really rapid population growth, it's hard for infrastructure to keep up. And so we haven't done the work necessarily, and I'm not even sure if there's data available to try and do that work to kind of match it up. But certainly the anecdote is in some of those regions with strong population growth and strong development. If you think about parts of Central Otago and Christchurch, there are some strains on infrastructure, but I think, we're taking the right steps nationally in terms of trying to link up infrastructure policy and get that pipeline of work laid out so that we can try and address it. But yeah, it's a good question, and I don't think I have an answer.
We would all love a crystal ball on where the infrastructure spending is actually going to come. We can have announcements, but until ground gets broken, sometimes you don't know what's going to happen. It would be great to see the KiwiSaver providers be able to fund some of that growth, and the money comes domestically, and that those returns cycle through. I appreciate your insights today, Mike, and encourage people to have a look at your Property Pulse report, and look forward to catching up again soon and talking property.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers, Mike. This channel's growing faster than your equity. Too blunt? No, just honest. You think your portfolio is solid? Then imagine what it looks like with an edge. Information isn't power, action is. Subscribe and get dangerous, or keep playing it safe while others don't.